think about the synthesis. One, we understand the nature of power, all of this is me, we understand the nature of power by recognizing that it is nothing more than an organization of force relations within a zone of their existence. An organization of force relations within a zone of their existence. So what does that mean? Here's the picture that I've drawn. Right, and this is, I was trying to think of a very sort of intro, user-friendly way of discussing force relations, and here is my idea. Now, we all know as kids how to play connect the dots. It's exactly that. You connect the dots. So if you're teaching your children to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you spread 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on a sheet of paper, and what initially seems to the child as to be a random distribution of nodes, of dots, as they connect the dots, they get to see the organization of those nodes. Meaning that the nodes, the dots, are actually in a strategic place. But it takes an understanding of the strategy to understand the grand design, if you will. That's sort of how I want to begin this very, very sort of general discussion. So, we'll label this A. We'll label this B. And we'll label this C. Right, so A, B, C. This has more connections. Okay, so ABC. Right, so I think pretty good visual. I probably could have used red. I don't know where my red marker is. But I am using color. I was encouraged by a friend to use colors, so I'm using colors. Alright, so we understand the nature of power by recognizing that power, remember we're talking about power, right? So to get back on track, we understand that the nature of power, right? In discussing power, understanding what it is, the nature of power, by recognizing that it is nothing more than an organization of force relations, right? I'll explain later in detail what force relations are, but just think of, for now, force relations as each of these individual dots. In connecting the dots, each of the individual dots is a point of force relation, right? The relationship of this point to that point, the relationship of this point to that point. Despite the fact that these 2 points are connected, the relationship of this point to this point as the grand organization is unfolded. Okay. 2. That should be clear. 2. The transformation of these force relations is the manner in which power manifests. I'll say that again. The transformation of these force relations is the manner in which power manifests. So the example is sort of B. How does this relate to what Foucault had said earlier? Remember what Foucault said. He says, if you look a little bit above number 2, bullet point number 2, as a process which through ceaseless struggles and confrontations, transformation strengthens or weakens them, as a support which these force relations find in one another, thus forming a chain or a system. Thus forming a chain or a system. Or, on the contrary, the destruction, the gaps. You can imagine that this was connected at one time, and then there's a destruction in the chain. Right? That destruction in the chain, right now I'm just coming from an extremely conceptual level. I'll ground this more in sort of contemporary, sort of common sense analysis. But what I want to do now is give you an idea of what he means by power. By power, all Foucault is saying is that you have little dots. These dots have a framework, but we just don't understand the strategy yet of this framework. This framework, the existence of these dots, we'll call force relations. And each dot is related to every other dot. This is why it's like the monad, right? Each dot is connected to every other dot, even if it's not a direct connection to any other dot. So the totality of these force relations, right? The totality of these force relations and the connection between these force relations, the connection from one to another, the fact that one is broken from another, creates what we'll call power. I'll give you an example that's a little bit more concrete than this. Think of it like this, and this will hopefully, I always try to give super simple examples so that you truly understand. If I were to ask you, what do you consider to be a powerful mind? You would say a mind that is smart, and there's varying degrees of how we can assess brilliance or genius or smartness, but a mind that's smart. We're going to keep it simple. So a smart mind is good, a not so smart mind, not good. Imagine that we're talking about one and the same mind, right? And there's a point in time where that individual's mind reaches its apex, the smartest that person will ever be. The person's at that moment now. We know that their neural networking is a connection of all types of connections, right? Dendritic connections, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on, right? All sort of chemically regulated and so on and so on. But it's a connection, the neural connection. We also know that as a person ages, or if a person consumes heavy amounts of intoxicants, those neural connections can be destroyed, so that the neural network isn't as complex and rich as it was before. As the neural network slowly dissipates, as the connections are weakened, as the connections dissolve, the person's intellectual ability also decreases. Their intellectual power decreases. So that with respect to our neural networking, we can talk about an increase in intellectual power as generally, right? As generally, just for the sake of pedagogical example, as generally increasing with a more complex network. The more connections that we made, the better we are at doing whatever it is that we're doing. As those connections that we had are lost and broken, well, it's a lot harder for us to do the activities that we used to be able to do with relative ease, because we have to travel, quote unquote, a longer route to get to perform some action in the world. So I think everybody has an understanding of that. And that's exactly the framework in which we can understand Foucault's account of power. Each node, each force relation is connected to every other force relation in the system, in the structure, in the body. It's not subjective for Foucault at all, and I'll get to that later, but just as an example, it's connected to every other force relation, and it is in that connection, in the almost infinite connectivity, one point to all others, that we come to understand power. Now that's some pretty abstract conceptual stuff. And the question is, how in the world is that going to apply to the occupation movement? Well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to take that very, very abstract stuff and make it very simple so that you can understand and then apply it. Or not apply it. Or just, watch the video series for the sake of just watching the video series and getting some new knowledge, which is always good. Okay, so underneath the image, the transformation of these force relations is the manner in which power manifests. B exemplifies the reversal transformation, strengthening towards C. So that obviously this is the and this is a very cursory example, but this is sort of the organizational framework of these force relations, right? These force relations have the potential to make this particular organization, and we have varying degrees, varying attempts to try and attain this as an end. Not that there would ever be an end to power. Not that this example is necessarily, you can't really visually depict what Foucault is saying. You can't. I think I will gradually give the closest visual depiction that you can have of these, of sort of Foucault's. You might be able to do it in animation, but not that it really matters. All that I want you to see, and I will have been successful in communicating on a very basic level what Foucault is doing, if one, you recognize that power is manifests, actualized in terms of force relations. If you understand that, good. If you then understand a little bit deeper that force relations can be organized to create an infinity of things. In this example, let's just say the image of a heart, for example. Force relations can be used to create institutions of domination, institutions of love and caring, institutions